When the craft came back, we went back along the coast to the Leopold, and as soon as we were hoisted, the Leopold set sail for Palermo. And we weren't in Palermo very long before the Rangers came back aboard. And there was an officer who'd been a captain when we'd landed him in Sicily with the Rangers. And he was now a major. He'd been promoted. And he was in charge of the Rangers that came aboard. And that was a major now, Max Snyder. And so Max Snyder was a great man, and we thought a lot of him. I forgot to mention that we had our first casualty in Augusta. During that heavy air raid, we had a signalman on the bridge that received a bit of shrapnel in his shoulder. Right near the collarbone. It was lodged right on top of his shoulder. It was quite a large bit of shrapnel. The shrapnel, of course, was removed by our doctor. Our ship's doctor was Surgeon Lieutenant Ian Buchanan, a Scot. And how could I describe him except to say that he was my best friend on the ship. And You just make these relationships in these situations where you have some very good friends. And Doc, as we called him, was a very good friend to a lot of people on the ship, I suppose. But he was something special for me too. The invasion fleet that went to Salerno was about 500 vessels, and one report I read said it covered 1,000 square miles of the sea. We went around the bottom of Sicily, past Syracuse and Augusta and Taormina, and up through the Straits of Messina in the night. We passed Stromboli in the night. We passed between Stromboli and the mainland of Italy in the dark, of course. And Stromboli has an active volcano, which put on quite a fireworks show for us. We were on the extreme left of the convoy, so we were quite near to Stromboli. And I can remember the navigational officer saying what a marvelous navigational aid it was to pinpoint your position if you were going to try to find a beach that you'd never been to before, somewhere in an unknown part of Italy. We, of course, proceeded up the coast of Italy, well out from the coast, in daylight after that, and that's when we were spotted by the German planes, I think, and we lost our chance of surprise. We were keeping our formation and traveling about 6 to 8 knots. It might be as well here to say a little bit about the landings that we were planning to do as we are nearing the beaches of Salerno now. We intended to make 5 separate landings, well apart from each other, but all within the 40 miles of beaches. On the extreme left was the Leopold's landing. We were going to land at a place named Ori, which was between 2 headlands. There was a large, long, high headland of something like 4,000 feet high on the left, And on the right, there was another headland that came out to sea, a smaller one, but still very high. And this separated us from the rest of the 4 landings. We were in this quite reasonably large bay of Maori. On the other side of the headland to us on the right was some British commandos were going to land, and they were going to use a bombardment. They were going to have a destroyer or 2 supporting them that was going to shell the shore, and then they were going to land. And farther along again there was a British division, and then a bit farther along again there was another British division, and then farther along again there was an American division. The 2 British divisions were going to use bombardment too. They were going to use the fleet that bombarded Sicily. All those battleships and monitors and cruisers and destroyers that I told you about. And the Americans on the extreme right were going to try for surprise. How they expected to do this, I can't imagine with all the bombardment that was going on a few miles away from them. Of course, it was night as we approached the Sorrento Peninsula. The convoy split up into its 5 separate invasion forces now. And the Leopold went farther north than anyone else. We were to be the first landing. We were to land at 2:30 in the morning. And the next landings after their bombardments were to land at 3:30. So they were giving us a chance to go ahead and give the Rangers an opportunity to get their part of the landing over before anything happened farther along the coast. And the Leopold went right up to the Isle of Capri. And when we turned to starboard to go along the Italian coast, leaving it on our port side, the land we were going by was the Isle of Capri at first, and then the Cape Sorrento, and of course we were heading into Maori. But when we came to the headland on our right, the Leopold didn't go in any further because we thought we were putting the ship in danger. There could be guns up on these high mountains ahead of us. They could be expecting us, and we didn't want to put the ship in too much danger. So the landing craft had about a half an hour or so run in, and of course a run out, and their time away from the ship would depend on how long it took to discharge the troops and get them ashore. The craft went in their first landing, and it's always an anxious time when you're on the ship. You're not so much worried about yourself or the ship being fired on. You're wondering about the blokes, the Rangers, and the crews that are taking them into the shore. And you're not at all happy until they're back safely. Which they did. They came back. Not a shot fired, not a sound from the shore, just the hum of the craft as they went in and came back again. And they had to make another run in. So they loaded up with the Rangers, and we had to hoist them up to deck level, main deck level, get the Rangers aboard, drop the craft again, and we did all this silently. And in the craft went again, and they'd be away for an hour or so, and we'd be worried about them. Not a shot, nothing we could hear, and back they came safely again. And they had to make one more run, but not all of them we only required 2 craft to take a small party of rangers. There were just 2 on each craft and 2 boats to go in, so there were 4 rangers and quite a lot of explosives and all the stuff they use, their ammunition and whatever they would need for this operation. And I always marvel at our efficiency at doing this sort of job. The craft were hoisted silently, and 6 craft went right up into the davits, and 2 were left at main deck level to be loaded. And it was just this time that in all the activity that was going on quietly but efficiently and expeditiously, my chief motor mechanic came to me, and he'd been round the craft to see how they were and talk to the stokers that were to go in again. And he was quite excited. He said, the flotilla officer's not going in on this run, sir. The stokers are quite worried. He said the flotilla officer says his engines were overheating and he can't go in. He said, there's nothing wrong with them, sir. He was quite annoyed to think that someone was throwing, illusions or aspersions and saying that his engines weren't working properly. So I didn't know quite what to do. The craft were getting loaded very quickly, and they were just about to be lowered. And so the only thing I could think of doing was hop onto one of them and go in with them. So the craft were lowered with me aboard one of them, and in we go to the shore with the sort of brooding hills on either side. They always look closer at night, and these very high hills, they're 3,000 or 4,000 feet high, and on either side, and very dark, of course, and we're heading in for the shore. We could hear quite a lot of bashing and banging along the coast by now. The bombardment and all the action was going on. It was all hell let loose, not very far from us, but over the other side of the headland, of course. But nothing from Maori. And we went quietly into the shore, just the hum of the engines and the sort of wish-wash of the water against the side of the boats as we went in. And I went into the engine room of the craft. It was very cramped in the engine room. There were 2 large V8 engines, and the stoker sat in between these at the controls. And of course the coxswain in the front of the craft could telegraph signals down to him, and could even talk to him through a voice pipe. But I talked to the stoker, and the engines were cool and everything was fine, and he was okay. And so I went back and watched us going into the shore. And the craft landed fairly well apart, and about 50 meters, I would say. And it was beginning to get a bit lighter then, because with all these runs in, of course, it was coming up to dawn. And I could see right up the beach which was fairly long beach, and see the sort of houses dimly up at the end there. But we couldn't see any activity at all. And we had to wait on the beach for, I would think about 10 or 20 minutes for some of the rangers to come down and help with the gear. But they got all the gear ashore, and I thought, well, I'll walk along the beach and go back with the other boat and talk to the other stoker, see how his engines are. And so that's what I did. I walked slowly along this beach, across, just by the water's edge, across to the other landing craft and boarded it. And it was gradually getting lighter, but still not proper dawn. And the craft backed off the beach, we'd got rid of all the gear, and the Rangers were gone again. And we went back to the ship without a shot being fired. So you could say it was a perfect surprise landing. The only thing is that through the day, as we got almost to the evening, as we were coming up, we got a radio message to say that the Italian government had capitulated and given up fighting in the war. And this caused quite a bit of jubilation on the ships, of course, going up there, because we thought we might have an easy landing. But the blokes at Salerno found out otherwise. The Rangers' job was to dash 6 miles inland and seize the strategic 4,000-foot high Chianzi Pass overlooking the plain of Naples.